All right, let's dive into psychology. We're going to unpack a popular textbook and some academic papers today.
It's like a sneak peek into how psychologists think.
Yeah, how they study the human mind.
And we're going to make it fun, not a boring lecture.
Right, break it down, use everyday language,
Real world examples so you walk away with some aha moments.
Exactly. Like, what even is psychology? Many think it's just lying on a couch talking childhood.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a common one.
So what is it really then?
Well, it's a science. It dives into how we think, how we feel, act.
The why behind our actions.
Exactly. And both the stuff we see and the inner workings.
Oh, so both.
Yeah, our source defines it as the science of behavior and mental processes.
So it's what we do and the thoughts, feelings behind it.
Exactly. And a big question is nature versus nurture.
Oh, that's always a big one.
Yeah, how much is genes, how much is environment?
Like, is a cake delicious because of the recipe or the baker?
Yeah.
Both are key, right?
Great analogy. And psychologists use tools to figure out the mind, like with your cake recipe.
What kind of tools?
Research methods, they're called. They help gather evidence, test theories systematically.
Makes sense. One that sounds cool is the case study, like detectives focusing on one person.
Yeah, deep dives into their experience, like this one in our textbook, a person called DF.
Okay, what about them?
They had brain damage and they lost the ability to consciously recognize objects.
So they couldn't tell you what they were seeing.
Right. But UT, they could still reach out, grab objects perfectly.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. It shows there are separate pathways in the brain for visual perception versus action.
So they didn't know what it was, but their brain could still guide their hand.
Exactly. Wild, right?
Yeah, mind-blowing. Shows how much is happening that we're not even aware of.
Totally. Another method is naturalistic observation. Researchers are flies on the wall.
Oh, I read about this funny one, the ear study. Eavesdropping on conversation.
That's it. Electronically activated recorder caught snippets of real talk.
I can see how that gives insights, but also kind of creepy, privacy-wise.
Definitely ethical questions there. We can touch on those later.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, surveys, those are everywhere.
Right. Online, phone, sometimes even on the street.
All the time. Why are they so big in psychology?
They gather info from a lot of people, fast, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, a snapshot.
Okay, but the sources say random sampling is key. Why is that?
Got to make sure the people you ask actually represent the bigger group you're interested in.
Like, if you only ask your friends, it's a limited view.
Totally. It'd be like thinking everyone loves your music just because your friends do.
Uh-huh. Good point.
Yeah.
So random sampling helps your results apply more broadly.
Exactly. Now, experiments, this is where people picture lab coats, mixing chemicals.
Yeah, like a mad scientist. But what are psychology experiments like, really?
No bubbling beakers, but it's still about controlling variables carefully, measuring impact.
Okay, I get it. Like, let's say how caffeine affects focus. What would that look like?
We could have two groups. One gets caffeine, one gets a placebo, like decaf.
Fiki.
We'd make sure the groups are similar, age, sleep habits, all that, then give them a task.
That needs focus, and then see who does better.
Exactly. If the caffeine group is way better, then we can be more sure it's the caffeine, not something else.
Makes sense. But I also wonder about ethics. Dealing with people's minds can be tricky.
Crucial point. Ethics are huge. We got to make sure participants are treated right, their well-being protected.
Like no tricking them into participating or anything?
No, they got to know what's up. They can also leave anytime, no penalty.
Oh, okay, good to know.
And researchers got to explain everything afterwards, the true purpose, any concerns.
So it's transparent and everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And this applies to animal research, too. Lots of rules for their care and well-being.
That's good. One thing I love about psychology is it makes you think critically.
Absolutely. Question assumptions, be aware of biases.
Yeah. Our source mentions this hindsight bias. What's that?
The I knew it all along feeling. Like your team loses and you think, I knew they'd choke.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, even though you were cheering them on the whole time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It makes us think we're better at predicting than we are.
So research is key to check those assumptions.
Totally. See how things really work, not just how we think they do.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Talk about how psychology applies to everyday life.
Love that. Where do you want to start?
I'm always fascinated by memory, so central to who we are, but it can be so unreliable.
Right. It's like a mental muscle. We use it constantly, and there are things we can do to strengthen it.
Like what?
Well, our sources talk about encoding, storage, and retrieval.
Encoding's like taking a mental snapshot, storage is filing it away, retrieval's pulling it out.
Spot on. And one big finding is the spacing effect.
Oh, tell me about that one.
Basically, spreading out your study is way better than cramming last minute.
Explains my bad exam grades then, haha.
Probably.
Hmm.
Spacing makes your brain work harder each time. Those connections get stronger.
So active testing instead of passive rereading.
You got it. Like mental reps at the gym. The more you practice retrieving, the stronger the memory.
Gotcha, makes sense. What about mnemonics? Do those actually help?
But they're memory aids, using vivid images or acronyms like to remember the planet's order.
Ooh, give me an example.
My very educated mother just served us noodles.
Okay, that's good. I'll be using that one for sure.
Awesome. What else are you curious about?
Well, from memory, let's move on to the roller coaster of emotions. Always so powerful.
They're more than just feelings, right? Physical changes, thoughts, how we express them.
So it's not just the butterflies, but also how you interpret them and how your face shows it.
Exactly. And there are many theories about this. One is the James Lange theory. We feel fear because our heart's racing, not the other way around.
Wait, so our body reacts first, and then our brain goes, oh, we must be scared.
That's the idea. You see a snake, heart pounds, you sweat, and then bam, fear.
Interesting. But our source also mentions the cannon-barred theory. That's different, right?
Right. It says the physical and the feeling happen at the same time, both triggered by the snake.
So my brain's like, danger,
Yeah.
and tells both my heart and my emotions to freak out simultaneously.
Exactly. And then there's the two-factor theory, which adds another layer.
Okay, tell me more.
It says emotions are a mix of the physical stuff and our interpretation of it.
So the context matters, too. Like, heart racing before a presentation is anxiety, but seeing a snake, that's fear.
Exactly. It's not just the sensation, but what we make of it.
Makes sense. So fascinating how our thoughts shape the experience.
Totally. Our minds and bodies, always in this dance.
Speaking of a topic that brings up emotions, stress. Seems like everyone's stressed these days.
It's a natural part of life, even helpful in small doses. Keeps us alert, focused.
But too much is bad, right?
Yeah, chronic stress, that takes a toll, mentally and physically.
I know that feeling all too well. So what can we do about it?
Well, there's a lot psychology can teach us about managing stress. Want to dive into that?
I'm all ears. So how do we manage all this stress? Psychology must have some answers, right?
Definitely. A lot, actually. One powerful thing is shifting our perspective.
Like looking at things differently.
Yeah, our sources talk about optimists versus pessimists and how they handle stress.
Okay, so the optimists, they're just like happy all the time.
Not exactly. It's more about their attitude. They approach challenges with a can-do spirit.
So they see setbacks as temporary, they focus on solutions.
Exactly. It's not pretending everything's perfect. It's being constructive, resilient.
Like, okay, this is tough, but I got this.
Yes. And that outlook tends to buffer them from the negative effects of stress.
Interesting. Our sources also mention social support. That makes sense.
Right. Strong connections with others can be huge.
That's like having a team cheering you on, reminding you you're not alone in the struggle.
I love that analogy. And research backs it up. Strong social support, healthier, happier people.
Makes sense. Sharing burdens can make them lighter.
Totally. And speaking of things that lighten the load, have you noticed exercise helps?
Oh, for sure. Clears my head, boosts my mood, at least for a while.
Tons of research on that. Aerobic exercise especially, like brisk walking, running, swimming.
So getting your heart rate up is key.
It seems to calm the nervous system down, lowers those stress hormones like cortisol.
Interesting. So it's not just the physical exertion, there's a chemical thing happening too.
Right. Plus, endorphins, those mood boosters get released.
So double whammy against stress. Calm and happy, sign me up.
Haha, exactly. The sources also talk about relaxation techniques, meditation, that kind of thing.
Can you really breathe away stress? Seems too good to be true.
More and more research showing the benefits of mindfulness, for sure.
Mindfulness. Is that just sitting in silence, emptying your mind?
Not quite. It's more about paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Okay, so not judging your thoughts, just noticing them.
Yeah, and your feelings, sensations, not getting swept away by them, just observing.
So instead of dwelling on the past or worrying about the future, it's being here, now.
Exactly. And many ways to practice formal meditation or just focusing on your breath.
So simple things can be mindful too.
Totally. Noticing your feet on the ground, really tasting your food, all that.
It's about changing how we relate to our inner experience, not just shutting it off.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, this stuff has actual physical benefits too.
Like what?
Lower blood pressure, reduce stress hormones, all that.
So it's like hitting the reset button on your whole system.
Exactly. All this talk about stress makes me think of self-care in general.
Yeah, taking care of yourself beyond just managing the bad stuff.
Right. One big takeaway from psychology is prioritize close relationships.
That makes sense. Humans are social creatures. We need connection.
Exactly. Nurturing those bonds, quality time, meaningful conversations, it all matters.
It's like that saying, joy shared is joy doubled, sorrow shared is sorrow halved.
Beautifully put. And we also need to nurture ourselves individually, of course.
Is that where the bubble baths and face masks come in?
Haha, they can be part of it, but it's really about anything that nourishes you, mind, body, spirit.
So sleep, healthy food, time in nature, hobbies, expressing yourself creatively.
Exactly. It's about listening to your needs, making choices that support your well-being.
Being kind to yourself, basically.
Exactly. And our sources also mention finding meaning and purpose.
Like having a direction in life, something to strive for.
Exactly. When we feel our life has meaning, we're more fulfilled, even when things are tough.
Makes sense. So it's about figuring out what matters to you and aligning your actions with that.
Exactly. It could be volunteering, a passion project, even just being the best version of yourself daily.
I love that. It's all about applying psychology to live a better life.
Totally. Now let's zoom out a bit from the individual to the social.
Social psychology. How we relate to each other, influence each other.
That's it. And one key insight is others have a huge impact on us, way more than we realize.
So we're not just making decisions in a vacuum, we're constantly being influenced.
Right. And one fascinating phenomenon is conformity.
Oh, like teenagers trying to fit in with the cool kids.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a classic example, but we're all susceptible to it throughout life.
Why is that? Why do we go along with the crowd, even when we disagree?
Well, think about it. We're wired for belonging, for social acceptance.
It feels good to fit in.
Exactly. And if going along with the group makes us feel accepted, we might do it even if we sacrifice some of our individuality.
Our sources mention this experiment by Solomon Asch, showing the power of conformity.
Oh, the line study, right. That's a classic.
Yeah, remind me how it worked.
Basically, participants had to judge which line matched a standard one easy task.
Sounds pretty simple.
But the catch was they were surrounded by other people who were in on the experiment.
So actors pretending to be participants.
Exactly. And those actors would give the wrong answer on purpose.
Whoa. So the real participant knows the right answer, but everyone else is saying something different.
Exactly. You'd think they'd stick to their guns, but nope. Over 60% conformed at least once.
Wow. That's a lot. It's like we doubt our own eyes just to fit in.
Powerful, right? It shows how social norms, those unwritten rules, really influence us.
So even when we know something's wrong, we might go along just to avoid rocking the boat.
Exactly. And this can be good or bad,
Like following traffic laws is good conformity, keeps things safe.
Absolutely. But it can also lead to groupthink, where bad decisions are made.
Because everyone's too afraid to speak up, challenge the group.
Exactly. That's why critical thinking and open communication are so important, even in groups.
Okay, so conformity is one thing, but our sources also talk about obedience. That seems more intense.
Right. Obedience is about complying with authority, even when it conflicts with our values.
And this is leading us to the Milgram experiment, right? The infamous one.
You know it. One of the most controversial, thought-provoking studies ever.
Ethically questionable, for sure, but the results are fascinating and scary at the same time.
Milgram was inspired by the Holocaust, wanted to understand how ordinary people could do such horrific things.
Yeah, how they could be complicit in that level of cruelty.
So he set up this experiment to see how far people would go in obeying authority.
For those who don't know, remind us how it worked.
Participants thought they were in a learning study. They were the teacher. Another person was the learner.
Okay, and what did they have to do?
The teacher had to give electric shocks to the learner every time they made a mistake.
Wait, real shocks?
Nope, the learner was an actor. No real shocks were given.
Okay, so the teacher thought they were shocking someone, but it was staged.
Exactly. The real focus was on how they'd respond to the experimenter, the authority figure.
And the experimenter would tell them to keep shocking, even if the learner was in pain.
Exactly. You'd think people would refuse, right? But over 60% went all the way to the highest shock level.
That's insane. So powerful, the influence of an authority figure.
It's scary, right? Shows we're capable of things we wouldn't even imagine.
So even kind, compassionate people can be swayed to do cruel things, depending on the situation.
That's the unsettling truth Milgram revealed. It's vital to understand these influences, to protect against blind obedience.
Powerful stuff. From conformity to obedience, we've covered a lot of ground here.
And there's still more to explore in the world of social psychology. We'll be right back to talk about aggression, attraction, and altruism after a quick break.
All right, back to the deep dive. We've covered the mind, social influence. What's next?
Let's talk therapy, how psychology helps people heal, grow.
I'm intrigued by this. I always picture that classic image, patient on the couch, you know?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's rooted in psychoanalysis, Freud's thing.
Oh yeah, Freud, the Oedipus complex guy, right?
That's him. Id, ego, superego, all that.
He was all about the unconscious mind, those hidden conflicts driving us.
Exactly. And psychoanalysis tries to bring those conflicts to the surface so you can deal with them.
Like the therapist is a detective, uncovering those hidden clues.
Great analogy. They use techniques like free association, just saying whatever pops into your head.
And the therapist listens for patterns, connections.
Right, like recurring themes that point to deeper issues.
What about dream analysis? I always thought that was cool. The hidden meaning of dreams.
Another key technique in psychoanalysis, Freud thought dreams were symbolic,
Of our desires, fears, all that unconscious stuff.
Exactly. A therapist might help interpret those symbols, gain insights.
Psychoanalysis sounds intense. The sources also mention humanistic therapies. Those seem different.
They are. Humanistic therapies are more optimistic, focused on growth, the potential for healing.
So less about the past, more about the present moment and the person's own experience.
Exactly. Carl Rogers' person-centered therapy is a big one.
What's that like?
The therapist creates a safe, supportive space, empathetic, so the client can explore their own feelings.
Okay, so the therapist isn't giving advice, more like a guide.
Right, trusting the client's inner wisdom to find their own answers.
I can see how that would be empowering.
Totally. Rogers said therapists need 3 things: genuineness, unconditional positive regard, and empathy.
Okay, break those down for me.
Genuineness means being authentic, real in the relationship. Unconditional positive regard is accepting the client no matter what.
No judgment.
Exactly. And empathy is really understanding their perspective, their feelings.
That sounds powerful, just having that kind of support.
It can be life-changing. Now, psychoanalysis and humanistic therapies are both insight therapies.
Insight therapies, meaning?
They aim to increase self-awareness, understanding of your inner world.
Okay, I get it. But there's another category, right?
What?
Behavior therapies.
You got it.
Yeah.
Those focus more on actions, behaviors.
So less about why you do something, more about changing the doing.
Exactly. They're based on learning principles like classical and operant conditioning.
Oh yeah, Pavlov's dogs, Skinner's boxes, all that.
Exactly. So the idea is unhealthy behaviors are learned, so you can unlearn them too.
Makes sense. What are some examples of those therapies?
Exposure therapy is a common one used for phobias, anxiety.
So like, if you're scared of spiders, they make you hang out with spiders.
Not quite. It's gradual, controlled exposure in a safe setting.
Okay, so you face your fear, but in a way that feels manageable.
Exactly. The goal is to break that link between the spider and the anxiety.
You learn the spider isn't as dangerous as your fear tells you.
Right. There's also virtual reality exposure therapy. That's cool.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. So you're in a simulation, like a fake spider world.
Exactly. Helps with phobias that are hard to recreate in real life, like fear of flying.
Very clever. What about aversive conditioning? I've heard of that too.
That's used for breaking bad habits, like smoking, by pairing it with something unpleasant.
So instead of enjoying a cigarette, you associate it with something bad, like nausea.
Exactly. Not always fun, but it can work.
And then there's operant conditioning, with rewards and punishments.
Right. Reinforcing good behaviors, discouraging the bad ones.
Like token economies, earning points for good behavior, you can trade them in for prizes.
Exactly. Used in schools, hospitals, all sorts of places.
Cool, so behavior therapies cover a wide range.
They do. Now, shifting gears a bit, there are cognitive therapies.
Those focus on our thoughts, right?
Exactly. The idea is our thoughts have a huge impact on our emotions, behaviors.
Change your thinking, change your life, that kind of thing.
That's the gist. Cognitive therapists help identify those negative thought patterns that are causing distress.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Catastrophizing, that's a big one. Imagining the worst case scenario always.
Oh, I do that. What if this happens and then this happens?
Exactly. Or all or nothing thinking, seeing things in extreme.
Like one mistake means you're a total failure.
Right. No middle ground. Cognitive therapy helps reframe those thoughts.
So you learn to think about things differently, More realistically.
Exactly. Very effective for depression, anxiety, PTSD.
Makes sense. Now, I've heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Is that related?
It is. It combines both approaches, cognitive and behavioral.
So it's like the best of both worlds.
Exactly. It recognizes that our thoughts, feelings, behaviors are all interconnected.
So you work on all three, not just one in isolation.
Exactly. You might challenge negative thoughts, but also practice new behaviors. What kind of behaviors?
Exposure exercises, relaxation techniques, role-playing for assertive communication, lots of tools.
Wow, sounds very practical.
It is structured, goal-oriented, present-focused.
Okay. So we've got insight therapies, behavior therapies, cognitive therapies. What else is there?
Well, there's a whole other branch, biomedical therapy.
Biomedical, so that's more medical, right? Like medications.
Exactly. Psychopharmacology, the use of meds to treat mental health conditions.
Antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, things like that.
Those are common ones. They work by affecting neurotransmitters in the brain.
Those brain chemicals that influence mood, all that.
Exactly. But meds aren't always the whole answer. They can have side effects too.
And they might not address the root cause of the problem.
Right, which is why they're often combined with therapy for a more holistic approach.
Makes sense. The sources also mention other biomedical therapies, like ECT.
Electroconvulsive therapy, that's a more intense one. For severe cases.
Involves inducing a seizure, right? Exactly. It's controversial, but can be very effective for certain types of depression.
And there are newer brain stimulation therapies too, I've heard.
Like RTMS using magnetic pulses. It's an exciting field, always advancing.
Definitely promising for the future of mental health treatment.
Absolutely. And then there's psychosurgery, the most extreme option.
Brain surgery, that sounds serious.
It is very rare, only used as a last resort for the most severe cases.
Wow, so there's a whole spectrum of approaches, from talk therapy to brain surgery.
Exactly. And the right approach depends on the individual, the specific condition, lots of factors.
This has been fascinating, exploring all these different ways to help people.
It's incredible how much psychology has to offer, not just for treating problems, but for living better overall.
Exactly. It's not just about fixing what's broken, but promoting growth, resilience.
Empowering people to live richer, more fulfilling lives.
Beautifully said. Psychology is really a science and an art, understanding and nurturing the human spirit.
I love that. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into psychology.
Wow, what a journey. It's amazing how much we can learn from studying ourselves, our minds, our behaviors.
It's a lifelong exploration, and we hope you'll continue to be curious, keep learning, keep exploring.
Exactly. To all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep those minds engaged.